We are so glad you joined us on Around Town, and Representative Jeff Collins is our guest today. And Jeff, I asked you to do this because you were getting ready to go for the short session.
That's right.
We're going to talk about the difference between the long session and the short session. And
Okay.
There's been so much churning about pros and cons, and everybody has an opinion, I think,
Right.
of what y'all have done and what you're getting ready to do. But before we start, what is exactly set up to be the difference? Why do you go for a long session
Right.
previously last year, and now you're going for a short session?
Well, Gene, as you know, the long sessions are our odd years. So 2013 last year was our long session. We started it, I think, the 26th of January and got through in early to mid-July. It generally takes about 6 months, or it has since I've been in there, the two long sessions I've been in to get our business done. The long session is the session in which the major legislative movements are instigated and carried out. Any big theme that's going to be, a big deal in state, like our tax reform, our regulatory reform, that's got to come out during the long session. And we also set the budget for the next biennium, for the next 2 years in the long session. The stated purpose of the short session is to go back in May. We're going back the 14th of this month. Hopefully we won't be there but about 6 weeks at the longest.
Good luck.
Yeah. Well, we're going to try to keep it to that. Our stated purpose is just to go back after the numbers have come in from the Department of Revenue, from tax collections. That's why we have to wait till May to go back and find out whether we're on track to meet our budget or not, whether we have to make any adjustments due to unexpected expenses. Overruns in Medicaid is always one of the issues we deal with, or whether revenues are not up to projection or more than projected or whatever. So the real purpose of the short session is supposed to be to go back and fine-tune the budget. Now, there are bills, however, that are eligible for consideration during the short session. We have a lot of study committees during the interim between sessions. I've been co-chair of 2 study committees during this interim, and those study committees can propose legislation that is heard during the short session. Of course, again, that was instigated in the long session because those were issues we felt like we didn't have time to deal with that needed further study, and therefore we appoint those committees.
And let me ask you, so since the long session concluded, have you been actively working on those, or did they just...
Oh, yes.
Wow.
Yes, we've been. In fact, I had to drive to Greensboro one day last week for one of our study committee meetings. It was held on site at UNC Greensboro. They're not always held in Raleigh. So yeah, we're working on committee work even during the interim. So we never really completely off the job in the General Assembly, even when we're not in session. Also, any bill that passed one house but didn't pass the other house can be considered in the short session as well. So there actually are a number of bills that can be considered, but mainly we're there to fine-tune the budget and make any budgetary adjustments that need to be made. And as long as nobody does any shenanigans, we won't have new legislation pop up.
Well, and having both houses be the same party might lessen the likelihood of that a little bit.
As long as nobody in our party wants to put, when I say shenanigans, the one thing that can happen is when we say that a bill has passed a house can be considered in the other house. I found out, first short session I was in, that you can actually take a bill that, say, passed the Senate and is sitting in a House committee, and if that senator who sponsored that bill is no longer interested in it or thinks it has no chance of passage or whatever, and a House member has something they really want to push, and they get that senator to agree to it, they can strip his bill, put anything they want to in it, pass it, and send it back to the Senate. So I'm hoping we're not going to have much of that, because that's the type of thing that can keep you there longer.
Jeff, when you came in or were elected,
Right.
Frame it for us exactly what, I mean, I tend to think it was probably worse than any of us thought. And of course, we deal with our family budgets, and we've all had to tighten our belts and just hear everywhere we go about shortfalls and no raises and whatnot. But were you shocked at the overwhelming debt of the state, or the situation the state of North Carolina was in?
I really was. You know, people asked me, I ran for the first time back in 2010, and people ask me, are you crazy? Why are you running? Especially now, because the one thing that was constantly making the headlines was that we had what amounted to a structural deficit in our budget of $2.5 billion, because the General Assembly that was there before us had used federal stimulus money that was not going to recur after 2010 to the tune of about $2.5 billion for ongoing operating expenses.
Oh,
So,
not
yeah,
add-ons.
No, not
ongoing.
add-ons, but ongoing operating expenses.
Okay.
So, we knew going in we had to find $2.5 billion or cut $2.5 billion or do some combination of those things. So we knew we were going in with a $2.5 billion hole. What I found out shortly after getting there was all this extended unemployment we had had, where you could stay on unemployment up to almost 2 years, 99 weeks. We had been borrowing money from the federal government to pay for that. And we had borrowed $2.5 billion, not made any payments, not even interest payments. So we were in debt to the tune of $2.8 billion to the federal government.
Plus the 2.5.
Plus the 2.5. Oh. Well, that wasn't all. I found out a couple of weeks later, our actuaries were saying that the state employees' health plan was going to run out of money. They were $500 million short of being able to meet the biennium from what had been appropriated before we got there. And we didn't want teachers and state employees having to pay for their own medical expenses.
Well, then that's a trust. I mean,
exactly.
That was promised.
So we came up with another $500 million to cover that gap. And then about that same time, we also were told by our actuaries that the state retirement plan was $400 million short of being funded. So when you add all that together, we really were dealing with deficits of about $6.2 billion when we got there, of which we knew less than half. So, our whole state budget, as far as what we provide on the state level, not what the feds add to it and so forth, is about $20 billion. So we had a deficit that almost equaled a third of a year's budget.
Good grief.
When we got there.
And there's a state mandate to have a balanced budget.
Absolutely.
So before
we didn't have any choice but to balance.
Yeah. And so all these cuts that people screamed about, or freezing of things that people screamed about, if you hadn't done that, then they might have just gone belly up.
Well, a lot of the stuff had already been frozen before we got there. The teacher pay grades freezing, which is what everybody hates, that was done in 2008. That was done before we got there.
Well, let's talk about some issues. I guess first off, tax reform and regulatory reform. Those are two of the issues y'all are taking on. Tell us about those.
Well, those were probably two of the biggest things that we did in 2013. The Nonpartisan Tax Foundation out of Washington, D.C., that just keeps up with tax burdens, comparatively for each state, had North Carolina ranked as the 44th best state to live in due to overall tax burden. In other words, our citizens were facing the 7th highest tax burden in the country.
Oh, okay.
When we got 44th best means you're 7th from the bottom.
Yeah, I thought best. I like best.
No,
no,
44th best. So in other words, the only states that had total tax burdens higher than ours were states like New York, New Jersey, California, Connecticut. It's not a list you want to be on.
We don't see ourselves as being like those states.
Well, we were very much so. The tax reform bill that we passed, House Bill 998, once that passed the House and Senate and became law, the Tax Foundation said with the stroke of the governor's pen on that, we went from 44th best tax burden in the country to 17th. So we jumped 27 states and got on a par with the other states around us, who are generally in the teens also, Virginia, South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia. We finally became competitive again tax-wise with the states around us.
By doing what? What were some of the...
Well, what we did was we flattened and lowered the personal income tax rate. We used to have personal income tax rates of 6%, 7%, and 7.75%. We flattened that basically to 5.8 this year and 5.75 every year going forward. We raised the standard deduction to help those people at the bottom. We also lowered the corporate income tax rate. At 6.9%, it was the highest of the southeastern states right around us. We lowered that to 6, then to 5. If we meet certain economic targets, which looks like we will, but over the next few years, that corporate rate could drop as low as 3%, which will make us very competitive trying to bring employers into North Carolina.
And South Carolina always basically eats our lunch with getting people because of their tax rates.
They have been doing that for years, and that's why we wanted to get competitive with South Carolina and Tennessee and the other states around us.
To bring jobs.
Absolutely. Well, that's the main purpose of it. That's the main focus of tax reform, is to bring jobs. That's also the main purpose of regulatory reform. In fact, the North Carolina Chamber said that the comprehensive regulatory reform bill we passed this year was the most important bill in their mind that we passed, even including the tax reform bill, which would have shocked me had I not had the opportunity in 2011, shortly after being elected, to serve on kind of an ad hoc committee. Speaker Tillis put together a group of about 8 or 10 House members that met with economic developers from around the state, people that work for the counties trying to bring employers in. We met by teleconference. I would go to a law firm over near Crabtree Valley in Raleigh. They had another branch in Greensboro and one in Charlotte, and we would meet around the table with the economic developers from our area and meet by teleconference. So the eastern folks would come to Raleigh, and we asked them, straight up, what can we do to help you bring businesses to North Carolina, keep the ones you've got, add employees, and the very first thing they mentioned was regulatory reform. They gave us about an 8-page action plan, and the first 4 pages dealt with regulatory reform. That was even more important to them than tax reform.
And for people who might not understand, what's an example of overburdensome regulation?
Well, we had a plant that was looking at potentially coming to North Carolina. They were looking at a piece of land in Brunswick County. They needed to be able to get their product offshore to market. So there was a canal and a dirt road that led to a place where they could have actually brought in ships and taken the stuff off. First, they proposed improving the dirt road, and Diener said, "No, you can't do that. You just can't do that." They said, "Okay, well, we'll dredge the canal." Well, no, you can't do that either. So finally, they said, "Well, there's a marsh out there. We'll build a pier over the marsh to the water and take the stuff out." No, you can't build a pier. That would shade the marsh. I'm thinking, well, trees shade the marsh. What are we going to do? Cut down all the trees on the shore? I mean, it just didn't make any sense. So as a result, they went elsewhere. And we heard horror stories about not only just kind of belligerence or acting like you don't want businesses, but a lot of times just failure to respond, not responding in time. A lot of it was just arbitrariness. And so, plus, we just have too many regulations. We found out we've got 22,500 state regulations on the books. We have more occupational licensing boards than any other state in the country. We have more things you have to get. The funny one that was passed the session before I was elected was to braid hair. Now you have to have some kind of license to do that, and a board has to approve your something. I mean, it's just the impediments to getting in business for yourself were just horrendous.
I thought early on, when new rules and laws are passed, you ought to have to take one off the books if you add another one, because we don't need to keep piling them on year after year. Jeff, we're going to have to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Good.
Are you just starting out on your own and want to be independent? Do you have a family and need a bigger home? Are the kids moving out? And are you downsizing? First Carolina Realty can help. A 1 or 2 bedroom apartment or house for those starting out. A 3 or 4 bedroom home for a growing family. Rentals, sales, new homes, pre-owned homes, investment property in the city or in the country. Call First Carolina Realty. Now is a good time to make that move. Real estate prices are right, interest rates are low, and there is a fantastic selection of homes available.
First Carolina Realty is a fully licensed real estate firm with offices at 3151 Zebulon Road in Rocky Mount.
If you have rental properties and are tired of the headaches associated with managing them yourself, or if you're looking for a new management team to manage your rental properties, call First Carolina Realty at 252-985-2321. Visit our webpage at firstcarolinarealty.com. We will gladly help you with all your real estate needs.
Hi, I'm Jean Almond of Almond's Drugs, and I want to invite you to be Almond's customer for your prescriptions. Our average pharmacy wait for your prescription is only 10 to 15 minutes. We have drive-through windows at both locations. We will deliver your prescription free. Our friendly and very experienced pharmacists specialize in consultation, and we are locally owned and have been a loyal part of your community for over 70 years. Just make one phone call to us and we'll make the transfer so we can start taking care of you. Thank you for staying with us. Representative Jeff Collins is our guest, and we're in his office here in Rocky Mount. And you represent about half of Nash County, right?
That's correct. The first time I was elected in 2010, I represented all of my district was inside of Nash County, and I represented about 85 to 90% of Nash County. With the redistricting, I got half my voters became new voters. Okay. Now I've got about half of Nash County and about half of Franklin County. And Representative Bobby Richardson has the other half of those two counties.
Well, we were talking about the regulatory changes and reform. Right. You already see benefits coming from that shortly.
Yeah, we do.
Very quickly.
We do. I thought that the tax and regulatory reforms combined, I kept telling people, give us time. If you give us time, you'll start seeing results from this. Businesses will begin to come to North Carolina. Well, it happened a lot faster than what I thought. I remember the CEO of Hospira was visiting here in Rocky Mount back last fall. They actually had a national board meeting here in Rocky Mount. And I was told, I wasn't in the board meeting, I was in the celebration outside. I was told that in the board meeting, he said that corporate CEOs around the country and around the world are standing up and taking notice to the fact that North Carolina is back in business.
Good.
And wants business. But even the things that I'm not a big anecdotal person. I'm more of a statistical person. I'm analytical. I like data that shows what's working and what's not. Since we have been in the majority party in 2011, there are several numbers that I look at. One is a number that the Philadelphia Federal Reserve keeps up with. It's called a coincident index. And that uses 4 factors. It uses your unemployment rate, your wages and salaries, number of hours worked in manufacturing, and the number of jobs. And so it's a much more comprehensive rating than just unemployment or something like that. And according to them, after the Great Recession of 2008, from 2009 to 2011, North Carolina was running behind the rest of the nation as far as increasing that coincident rate. Since we've been in charge the last 3 years, we are way outpacing the nation in return in those numbers. In fact, we were growing, I think, at the 6th highest rate from 2011 to 2013, and at least 3 of the states ahead of us are states that are benefiting from extracting natural resources, natural gas and oil and all, which we've also set in motion to do in the near future. So we could skyrocket even higher on those ratings. As far as unemployment goes, I hear a lot of people saying they don't trust the unemployment rate because so many people have quit looking for jobs. But it doesn't matter whether you're looking at the traditional unemployment rate, the U4 rate, I think they call it. I also look at the U5 and the U6 rate. The U5 rate includes people who have quit looking for work, and our rate of decrease in that category is much faster than the national average as a whole. The U6 rate even includes underemployment. That includes people that would like to be working, but they're going back to tech school to get job skills. It even includes people working part-time who would like to work full-time. And I know in the 12 months from October of 12 to October of 13, we had decreased our rate 2.1%, while the rest of the country had decreased their rate 0.9%. So we were decreasing our rate more than twice as fast as the rest of the country as a whole. So it doesn't matter what you're looking at, our policies are working. And frankly, they're working faster than I thought they would.
Well, in North Carolina, you're from here. I've always lived in North Carolina. I love North Carolina. And I love Rocky Mount. And I want, it's a great place to live, great quality of life, but to put these things to get our financial house in order is just absolutely crucial. And thank you for taking the hits and the knocks that many of y'all have taken to say we can't let our state go bankrupt. We've got to be responsible to invest in the future.
Well, again, I'm very analytical, and so you know the emotional stuff, the emotional pitches and stuff don't hit me very much. And frankly, a lot of the people who were elected when I was in 2011 or 2010 and again in 2012 have been business people who are pretty fact-driven. So that's why we've headed the way we have.
I want to teachers, and that's a hot topic because we all know how very important teachers are. I know you taught school, I've taught also, but what do you think can be done in the short session to help the morale of the teachers and just help pay them better for?
Well, the one thing we'd like to do is raise their pay. You know, the General Assembly sets the base pay for teachers. Now, one thing that I don't think people realize is we don't set the total compensation package. The local counties eventually set the total compensation package, but we do set the base part that the state pays. You know, according to the NEA, they keep saying that North Carolina's 46th in teacher pay. What they don't say is that we're 11th in the percentage of teacher pay that's paid by the state. We pay a much higher percentage of teacher pay at the state level than most states do. Most states depend a lot more on the localities to do it, and that's why their property taxes are high. But as far as we're concerned, the one thing that we've pretty much stated a commitment to do is raise base teacher salary because we think it's too low right now at $30,000. The idea is to raise it this year to a minimum of $33,000 for all teachers in the system.
Oh, I'm not just
whether they're
new
new,
entries.
second, third year, because the way the pay grades were frozen in 2008, there'll be a number of teachers that'll catch. And then next year to raise it all the way to $35,000, which will catch even more. Now, above and beyond that, it all depends on how how our revenues came in. The talk among both caucuses has been to try to raise state employee pay as a whole, which would mean every teacher and every DOT worker and every Department of Correction worker and all the way down the line. How much we'll be able to do that, of course, we don't know until we get back and see what the Department of Revenue tells us. But the desire is to want to raise people's pay as soon as we can, just like I'm sure out in the private sector.
Everybody
wants
to
to raise their employees' pay, but unfortunately in the private sector, most people got pay cuts in the 2008 to 2013 years. More people got pay cuts than got pay raises.
Well, there was, everybody was trying to circle the wagons and keep their businesses going and keep people employed.
Keep people employed, period. That's right.
Let's talk about energy. Of course, Electricities is in your district is probably one of the hottest buttons. And you and Senator Newton, Buck Newton, have really advocated hard. I know another area where you advocated was the annexation issue, and there's still signage thanking you, I think, for that. But what is there hope?
Well, you mentioned Senator Newton and I have pushed since we first got elected in 2011 to do something about lowering the electricity rates here, because not only is it killing the average person, the average individual resident, and of course it hurts the poor worse than it hurts anybody else, but it's also strangling those 32 municipalities from being able to draw businesses in, especially high energy consumption businesses. There's no way you're going to get manufacturing plants that use a lot of electricity or oil or anything else to come into our areas when the cost of the electricity is so high.
And they're more rural, kind of poor counties to start with, so it's a double whammy.
It is a double whammy. So what we did was we kind of begged and pleaded and cajoled and yelled and screamed until the Speaker of the House and the President Pro Tem of the Senate let us be co-chairs of a joint House-Senate study committee after the 2011 session to see what could be done about it. And we were told, well, nothing can be done. It's been a problem for 30 years. Nobody's looked at it since 1999. Blah blah blah. But we went ahead and carried the study committee out, and we basically came up with two ideas. The first one was that obviously the biggest problem with electricity is the debt. We know that 30 cents of every dollar we pay in electricity bills goes to nothing but debt reduction. So our bills are automatically going to be 30% higher than everybody else's. I mean, there's no way they can't be. So we need to eliminate that debt. In order to do that, we began to really push an idea, which actually had been put forward even back in the 1999 study, just wasn't followed through with, and started talking with the folks at Electricities about their need to market their generation assets and try to sell them to an investor-owned utility. Now, we didn't know what that was going to look like at the time because we had Duke and Progress Energy separately, but talking about a merger. Obviously, they weren't going to do anything until that merger was finalized, so that put us off for a couple of years. Well, finally, that merger happened last year, and we got behind the folks at Electricities and behind the folks at Duke and said, we really would like to see you folks start negotiating for a market-based purchase of the generation assets, the part of the nuclear plant and the coal plants that Electricities is a minority owner in, and purchase those and see how much of the debt we can reduce from doing that, because that's the single best thing we could do to lower electricity rates. Well, I guess you saw in the paper 4 to 6 weeks ago, they came out, Duke and Electricities jointly saying that they were negotiating to do that very thing, and I don't think they would have made that public if they weren't pretty far along the path of some type of agreement. So that's been going on kind of behind closed doors. Buck and I haven't said a lot about that. Senator Newton and I haven't said a lot about that because we didn't want to muddle the negotiations that were going on, and the last thing in the world you want is leaks to the newspaper about something that's sensitive like that.
But you both are keenly watching it and being our advocates,
absolutely,
right?
and we're far along the path now, but even if and when Duke and Electricities come to an agreement, we'll still have to have the approval of FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission on the federal level. We'll have to have the approval of the Utilities Commission here in North Carolina, and it will probably require 1 or 2 more pieces of legislation out of the General Assembly for all of this to happen. So we're still not there yet, but we're a lot closer than we've been in 30 years or 40 years or however long this problem has been in existence. And we're very hopeful. We feel like this is probably, Senator Newt and I both feel like this is probably the best thing we could do and the best legacy we could leave for Eastern North Carolina. If we could get that electricity rate dropped 20 to 25% on people's bills and industry's bills, that would do more for this area than anything else we could do.
I wholeheartedly agree. I was with a couple of business people this morning at breakfast, and we talked about this. If that were this celebration in this area and in poor areas, Eastern North Carolina, rural areas, would just be unprecedented as far as the relief.
Well,
That would just open the floodgates of feeling like we could recruit more manufacturing
absolutely.
and all kinds of things. Okay, we've got about 1 minute. Anything you want to be sure we talk about? I guess you mentioned energy.
Yeah, we're working on, of course, finding and extracting the natural gas that we know we have, at least to some degree, below our surface. We don't know how much yet. We're working on the mining committee making rules for how that'll take place. I think we're supposed to see those rules, I believe, either October or November of this year. So we may get called back into special session to take a look at that. Hopefully we'll be able to approve those by the next long session, and they may not even call us back early. We may just see them in January. But I'd like to see us, hopefully by next year, we'll be taking bids to start having companies come here and explore. Unfortunately, I think most of it's going to be in the Piedmont, it looks like, where they think that's where the reserves are anyway. So we'll see, but it'll benefit the state as a whole.
Well, my philosophy is buy it locally,
Exactly.
if at all possible, and if you can't buy it locally, buy it in North Carolina.
Well, if we could be energy independent here in North Carolina, that would be a
Wow.
wonderful thing.
It sure would. Thank you, and I would love for you to come back after you come back from the session, or anytime you want to, and
Be
share
happy
what's
to.
what's
Gene,
happening.
thanks for having me on your show.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us. See you next week.